Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author and illustrator. Today, I'm talking with Rio Cortez and Lauren Semmer. They are the author and illustrator team behind their newest book, The ABCs of Women's History. Both of them have their own beautiful backlist of books, including their previously published picture book together, The ABCs of Black History. But they're here today to talk about their newest. The ABCs of Women's History is a beautiful, powerful celebration of women, their history, and their future, and it centers on the diversity of the disruptors who blazed a path forward for everyone. There's so much to discuss in this beautiful book, so let's just get right to the episode. Rio, Lauren, welcome to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thanks so much for having us, Stephanie.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephanie.
I love when I get to talk to people about nonfiction picture books. It is pretty much my favorite genre, but when I get to talk to the author and the illustrator, there's a special kind of energy that comes when you are all on the same call. So I'm thrilled that we were able to make that work today. Thanks to you both. Thank you. So let's start with some introductions. I would love to know how both of you got to this collaboration in this book, and hopefully you'll be willing to tell us a little bit about your individual journeys through children's literature to today. So Rio, do you want to start and jump in?
Yeah, well, I think some of our story overlaps. I could start there because I think I met Lauren, we met through our editor, Tracy Todd, who we worked with on the ABCs of Black History. We have a different editor for the ABCs of Women's History, but Tracy, sort of from my intro to children's literature, was that Tracy invited me to write a poem about Black history. And my background is in poetry. So at the time I was working at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. So that was something that was part of my life, was being in the Black History Archive. And also, I think she thought that with my poetry background, I went to NYU, where I have an MFA in creative writing and poetry, and Sarah Lawrence College, which is not upstate, but in Westchester, also for poetry. So I think I had never thought to write for young people before I met Tracy, who's an incredible writer herself and children's literature advocate and editor and person about town. And so I think that invitation to think about those two subjects that were really big in my own life, but that I had never merged together for kids, was how I entered this space of writing picture books. Yeah.
Thank goodness. Lauren, how about you?
So my journey to the book we're at today also did begin with the ABCs of Black History, which is the first book I ever illustrated. Before that, I was a commercial illustrator, and also, between commercial illustration, I was also a stylist. And so I did prop styling, and I also did some wardrobe styling. So I was kind of juggling those two worlds, and I was approached, I had a portfolio online with some work, I'd done some other commercial work in like magazines, and I was approached to illustrate the book, and I was just so excited about it. My background is in, obviously is in, a creative world, but I also love history. and I love Black history. It's always been something I, have just kind of researched on my own and like love to read about, art, music, film. And so, when I was approached with this project, I was, I sort of had to pinch myself because I was like, wait, I get to do a children's book and I get to incorporate all these different worlds that I'm sort of loving. And it was an immediate yes. And that kind of began my journey into children's publishing. It's been exciting. I've had some other books come out since then. And I'm really excited to have another book with Rio, the women's history book.
Yeah.
Hey.
Which, I know you have the previous book as well, which I have read, but there's just something special about this book. I've got to tell you, I read it. I'm maybe on my fourth or fifth read, just soaking it in. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's lyrical. It's powerful. Like as a woman reading it, it's like you just get goosebumps of look at all of these women who came before us, who were standing on their shoulders, who did so much, who were so much, so that we could keep it going. And I love the opening quote that you start with, which is, "We are the ones we have been waiting for." It's
Yeah.
just such a beautiful celebration. And I love knowing now those moments that brought you to it. Whether it was, the spark of a poem or kind of a pinch me moment of this is what I get to do, to see it and to be able to hold this book. It's just every woman's going to want to hug it, is what I think.
That's amazing. I hope so.
I think so. So Rio, I would love to start with you and ask you the question that was on my mind the whole time I read it was, how did you choose? How did you choose which beautiful words represented the alphabet and then which beautiful women represented those words on the page? It feels like such a daunting yet inviting process. And I'd love you to talk more about how you chose to
Yeah.
put on the page what you did.
It is really daunting, actually. And luckily, I had a little bit of experience because we had worked on an A.B. Siderian history book already. And so when I worked on the first ABC book, I really I looked really nuts. Like our kitchen had index cards all over the wall. And I was just visualizing like every person in Black history that I wanted to talk about who had an A. And then I had a lot of hand wringing about whether it's their last name or their first name. And then we open it up to thinking, the alphabet around more, not just names, but also concepts like community or civil rights or dreaming. And I think that gave me like a lot more flexibility in how we could organize the text of the book. So because it's like that, it didn't have to be that one person's name relegated them to a letter, but more that it was an invitation to include more women into the rhyming lyric of the text. So it was, once I figured out those concepts, then I started to put women underneath that I felt like were really impactful in those themes. And then from there, some of it just is the way that the lyric has to rhyme together. Sometimes that will kind of help narrow things down for me, but it is something that I feel like for months I would like wake up and be like, oh my God, what about her, and I feel like I'd have to go back. And so it's a long process. And then with your editor too, and other eyes and readers, folks would say like, what about her? And what about her? And that was a really wonderful experience. It's just constantly being reminded that there are more and more women. It's like a boundless subject and there's no way. I think once you accept that there's no way you can fit everyone into the book, and that you just have to move forward and that this is like a jumping off place. And once you get to that place of acceptance, I think I was able to sort of finalize the text. But there's also back matter, which I always say.
Yeah.
So like whoever can get into the poem of the book could be in the back matter, which gave me a little bit of relief. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There are a couple. I don't know which thing I want to start with. You mentioned, I want to start actually with the alphabetic nature of the book. As you mentioned, it's not your simple A is for apple, B is for bear kind of text where there's this one singular idea on the page. The book is very expansive and it's very inviting. And so, for example, just to look at letter A on that first page, A for anew, artist, activist, allies, able, abundance, affirmation. You really captured so much on the page without overwhelming the reader, but inviting them to really explore the more complexities of this topic, which is all of these women in history. And I think right from that first page, you realize this is not your typical ABC book, right? This is so much more. And so I really appreciate how you started there. I can picture your walls with index cards, notes, trying to figure out which letters, which words go in, which people go in. And the way that you've done it with multiple words for us to consider that are so beautifully connected, it just has a beautiful feel to the book.
Thank you. And I was going to say, like, also, I mean, it's the collaboration between the art and the text too, because on that spread, for example, Lauren's illustrated children, which I know has been really important to both of us, is just including children in the story of history too. But there are lots of moments where the woman, like the woman in history, is illustrated by Lauren and not spoken in the text at all. And sometimes, you know, a little mixture of both. So
yeah, and I'm definitely going to pick Lauren's brain when we get to when we get to that, Lauren, about the illustration. But the other thing I was thinking as I read, I have a lot of quotes that I love. They're all over my office. They're filled in notebooks. And one of them is from Jim Rohn, and it's been quoted and repeated by a lot of people, which is, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." Right? It's that average of who you surround yourself with matters. And I felt like, you know, even as an adult reading this book, I felt like you just surrounded me with possibilities, right? With celebrating what had come before, but then knowing, wow, okay, I can feel, you can feel that energy. And to be a child reading this, to be a young girl reading this and think, wow, what's next for me? Oh, it's like goosebumps reading.
That's so good to hear. I'm so glad. Yeah, I have a daughter, and I also write, I feel like, from channeling my perspective as a parent, but also my own, you know, and my own experience in girlhood also informs the way that I think I wrote this book too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for everybody. It's for, you know, the adults with our inner children and something call them, as well as, you know, what's next. And you have for I can't pick a favorite letter, but I will say one of my favorites is why. Because of that beautiful invitation that the two of you put on the page. Y is for you. Yes, you in all your glory. You are uniquely part of the story. There's a future ahead and a path to claim, and most important of all, a place for your name. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. That's my favorite spread too, actually. So I'm glad that resonated.
It did. It did. So, Lauren, how did you go about bringing all of these beautiful words, all of these beautiful names and women to life on the page?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's 26 spreads. It's a big book, you know. I think the average picture, I think when we do the average, it's like 14 spreads. So it's about double. Um, you know, it's a process. I received Rio's manuscript, which was gorgeous and beautiful and just so inspiring in itself. Then I have to let it kind of sink in a little bit because there's just, as you said, there's a lot to process. And I try to think about how I can help tell the story through the art. So through each spread, I think about, well, how can I bring, you know, the history and a bit of storytelling, you know, to the visuals? You know, so I make notes. A lot of time I start with notes and then I start sketching. Then there's revisions. And then in some examples, like for example, D is for dreaming. we made a gallery and we had all these different artists in there. So I was sort of researching what artists to include, and it's really hard, and I have Rio's ideas, and then I need to, I kind of elaborate on that. So it's a process, a lot of going back and forth, a lot of revisions on my end, and then, sharing it with the team and seeing what they think. And it's, I just, it's such a joy to work on. It was a really fun book to make.
Mm. See, you say fun, and I say, oh my gosh, how in the world did she bring this to life? Because I'm struggling to just put a couple of stick people
I know.
on the page.
Same.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I really like to research. So, when I see certain words, I'm researching those, or I'm trying to, I'm looking up, for H's for headliners, which was one of my favorite ones. I didn't really know about Anna May Wong, the actress, before. And so learning about her and her story was really interesting. And then kind of imagining, this timeless space where we have all these women who are, existing at different times and working on a set together.
Yeah.
It was just kind of a fun, exercise for me. And so I really enjoy doing that. So for me, it's a good time.
Yeah. So when I look across the book, there are things that really are cohesive across the entire book. You have these beautiful, bright colors. Things are just jumping off of the page for the reader. But what I also love that you did is that as you go through each spread, there is a different background color.
Yeah.
That makes it pop out. There are different techniques, like for G is for groundbreakers. We've got this nice bright background and this kind of, science elements on one side, but then we have these white block-like features that actually feature the women. Yet on another page, it could be K is for knowledge. It appears that they're in a school, and then you have these beautiful books with titles that then I have to go and read every title and see what those are. And the important figures are up on portraits on the wall. I was just so struck by your creativity of how through those 26 pages, no one's getting bored here, right? From the words
Right.
at all, because they're new people, but it felt like every page was just a new discovery really to jump into. And so I would love to have you talk a little bit more about that. Did you kind of go page by page and think, how do I represent this versus this and tie it all together?
Yeah. I mean, there's some things I did to tie it together, but yeah, my approach was to think, and again, I did the ABCs of Black history, which I learned a lot on. So that helped. But my approach was to take each letter and sort of imagine it as its own world. And then when I did that, it was easier for me to imagine how it all worked together. And you have some different themes you're trying to draw together in the art. For example, K for knowledge, which is about, librarians and teachers, which was just like I thought was such a fun, fun to include in this book. It occurred to me that, we have this back in a library, you have books. And so there's an opportunity to include children's book authors who happen to be women. And it's amazing because even through that process, we all are sort of in this world, you learn there's not that many. It really, over the last 15 years, we've seen more, but there just hasn't been the opportunities. And even going through it, I was, spending time looking and looking and looking. I was blown away by how many women, there just weren't that many.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it wasn't very hard to edit this down, sadly, even though there's so much women's storytelling in the world. We've just been so excluded.
Yeah.
So, just those, it's just, I guess approaching each page as a little world helped, because it could be really overwhelming for an illustrator otherwise. And then also just finding themes, like Rio writes themes into her poetry, and finding themes, like, for example, the bird on page C, you'll see throughout the book, the freedom dove was flying through the different spreads. You see the bird at the end, just keeping that kind of moving through the page.
Okay, I didn't
from
notice
B
that.
to
Now I
C.
have to read it like a seventh time. On the lookout for that little
But actually,
Easter egg you
by
just dropped.
Angelo, it's the caged bird flying off of B through C, and then I think the last time you see it is on Z, and then you see it on the cover. So that was the idea of freedom was such a big important part of the poem that I wanted to show that. So there's just little things, I guess.
I
love that. I don't think I knew that either, Lauren. That's
Yeah, we're all just frantic. No one can see us, thankfully. We're all just going through the pictures. Like, wait a minute. Now I've got a little sticky note. Now I gotta read it again with that lens.
that's awesome.
I do appreciate you sharing that process because it does feel when you go page by page, you feel the emotion and the celebration on the page. And because each page has a different focus, a different theme, a different set of women, the way that you brought that to life does evoke different sets of emotion page by page. And I'm just thinking, for example, letter U, right, which has this green background. I love the phrase, it is for unbought and unbossed. And then you turn the page and you have this beautiful purple, deep colors for vocalists. And there's Beyonce and Selena. And it's, page by page is an experience. And it's one that readers are just going to want to sink into. I mean, I didn't even mention my other favorite, which was W, because of the waves and the words and the waves.
That was one of my favorite words. It just really, it moved me.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Could either of you pick a single favorite if asked?
It's so hard.
I know I couldn't. Other than, that letter Y, which I loved because it was just a beautiful call to action for the reader to believe in herself. That I would say is a favorite because of that, but I would be really hard pressed to have to choose a second favorite from all of those letters. So I was just curious, as the one who wrote the words and drew the pictures, if you have a favorite.
I really like we talked about YW for waves, because also you're thinking about, I'm thinking about women's history courses that I took in college, and I wanted to address waves of feminism that changed each time to be more inclusive, especially as writing as a Black and Latino woman, and thinking there were waves of feminism that I felt really that I felt excluded from, and so being invited to think about women's history, the project of it felt really important to me to talk about how those changed. And so that page, but I was like, this is for children. We're not going to talk about third wave feminism in the book. But what I love about that, in addition to the way that Lauren drew that, it looks like a generation to generation and this stream of exchange between them, which was so powerful as an image. But I also, the word wave is waves are a powerful metaphor. So it didn't have to be in the way that we're thinking about waves of feminism. But I did want to kind of acknowledge that those have shifted over time to include people who look like me and kids who look like me, and other children, And so, anyway, I love that spread because I felt like it was doing a lot of that work underneath too. So yeah, and I also like the last letter Z. It just feels really fun. The way that Lauren illustrated it is really fun.
It's a celebration. Yeah, it's a celebration.
Yeah, and I have to say that Z is a really tough letter when you're writing an abecedarian book. It's just always hard. There's not that many words that start with Z. It's not the most inviting letter as a prompt, unlike S or M or C, which have an abundance of ways you could write them. So I just want to, it's always challenging, but I really like the way that this one turned out.
Yeah. Lauren, would you have a kind of close to a favorite? It's even harder for you too.
I really enjoyed reading. I really enjoyed the whole poem. I love but I think for me, N is for no, was when I read it, it was so powerful to me. And I instantly imagined children all saying no in different ways.
Yeah.
Because it's such a hard thing to learn how to do sometimes, to tell people no. And so I thought, well, here's a way to show the different ways we can say no. And I just really liked that, just the message of it.
Yeah, this was another one that I love too, because especially for women, it is hard to say no. It's hard to keep boundaries and all the people pleasing. And this was just, yeah, a variety of ways to think about that. Yeah. I've got, I think, 26 favorites. The other thing I love that this book did for me, and I know it'll do for readers, and I know as an educator, I love when books do this. And that is send kids forward into their curiosity, into their questions, into their next book, into their next appropriate media search of, wait, I didn't know about her. Who's that? It feels this book is a spark to keep learning about perhaps the figures or even the terms that are just speaking to students that they didn't know or don't know enough about or just simply want to know. I feel like this is such a catalyst into more learning and more curiosity.
That's my hope. That's like my dream for the book, really. So yeah, I'm glad you see it that way, because there's folks in there that I like, as I'm writing it, I'm encountering for the first time too. And so I hope that that's the experience of readers of all ages as well. Yeah.
It will be. I know. I've read lots of books with lots of kids in lots of classrooms, and I could just see us all leaning in and be like, wait, do you know this one? Do you know that one? And then, like I said, go to the next book, go to the next search, and just lift those women up even more. More people know her name, more people are talking about her, which then allows us, like I said in the beginning, to stand on their shoulders and keep going forward in that work. So you mentioned your hope. You had such a beautiful segue to the question you didn't know I was going to ask, Rio. But Lauren, I'd love to know what your hope for this book is as it gets into readers' hands.
I hope that it sparks curiosity. I hope that it empowers children. I hope they feel excited about their place in history and their ability to affect change in the world. And I hope that they just enjoy reading it and enjoy the art and really that it makes them feel good about themselves. That's my goal.
Yeah, they're beautiful goals. And it's a book that I imagine will be read like me, not just once, but again and again and again when we need it, when we need that reminder of what we're all capable of. This is a book to have close by, whether you're 7 or 77 or 47. So I so appreciate you taking the time to talk about this book. I'd love for you both to share where listeners and future readers can find you online so they can keep track of your books, any other future projects, or any author visits, all sorts of things. Where can they find you online, and what might they have a sneak peek and looking forward to as well? Rio, you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Like, I am online at riocortez.com and also on Instagram at Oh Really Rio, where my art and personal life merge. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this, which is out next week. By the time this airs, it will have been recently published, but and to celebrating Women's History Month, especially with this book. And then late in the summer, I have another picture book coming out called Blue Velvet Chair, which is all about my daughter looking out her apartment window from a blue velvet chair, and it's about change. And yeah.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. I can't wait. How about you, Lauren?
Hey, so you can find me at laurensemmer.com, my website. And I'm also on Instagram, which is by BY Lauren Semmer. On there, you can see some of my art and some things going on and events and what I have going on next. And I actually have another book besides the ABCs of Women's History, which comes out really soon. I have another book coming out, and I don't know what the date. It'll probably be fall in this fall. I'm doing a version of The Night Before Christmas.
Oh,
Wonderful.
And I'm really, really excited about it. It's finished and I just can't wait for it to be out in the world. So I'm very happy.
I'm excited about that too, Lauren. Can I say that I was reading the original poem with my daughter and I didn't have a copy this, and she asked to read that this Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
And so I found like a New York Public Library, like original, like,
Yeah.
and so we were reading it and I was like, oh, I'm so excited for when Lauren's book comes out and like show her with like vibrant pictures.
Oh, I think she's gonna like it. It's set in New York City.
Oh, perfect.
With a little girl. So is the main character. So and Santa's pretty cool and he's got some pretty cool reindeer. So I think it'll be a really fun a fun version of the poem. So I'm actually really excited about it. So
awesome.
Well, that's wonderful. I will be sure to put links to your websites, to your social media handles, and certainly mention all of the titles of the books that we've discussed here on the show notes so listeners can find it. Listeners, you need to get your hands on this one, The ABCs of Women's History. It's going to be one that's close. It's not going to be one that's tucked away on my shelf of beautiful literature. This is for me, it's an adult what's I can't think of the piece of furniture that's next to my bed right now. What's that bedside table? Like it's that just a reminder of getting a good night's sleep, everyone, because tomorrow we all have work to do. It's beautiful.
I love that. Thank you, Stephanie, so much for what a thoughtful conversation around the book. It's been really a pleasure.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it.
It's lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.